I want to thank you so much for taking your time out today to join us for this very important and timely webinar, um, Protecting Your Company's Most Valuable Asset, Your Digital Identity. Um, we're very excited that you've joined us here today. As we get started, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items to make sure everybody has a great experience. First, the session is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link of the recording via email after the session. Um, Also, everybody's been placed in listen-only mode because we want to hear from you and answer your questions. Please use the chat feature so our presenters can address it. Uh, this presentation is being put on by FutureLink IT. FutureLink is a managed IT services provider. At FutureLink, we focus on being a service-based business. An IT service, IT is the service that we provide. FutureLink provides multiple categories of service from IT support, IT security services, custom application development, high-speed internet, and much more. I'm joined today by Kim Canese, who is focused on cybersecurity and helping organizations better understand cybersecurity threats and reduce their vulnerabilities. I now turn it over to Kim to walk us through protecting your company's most valuable asset, your digital identity. Thank you, Kim.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. So glad to see everybody on this webinar and super excited to talk to you about cybersecurity and some of the threats posed by the dark web, really hoping that everybody can take away some key insights and tips to help keep your business safe. I think by now we've all seen stories about data breaches. It feels like there's always a new story about a company that got breached and how it affected millions of users and included all kinds of personal data that's now out on the dark web. I think we've seen some really prominent, well-known and successful companies get wrapped up in these breach stories, and the numbers of affected users seem to just grow and increase with every single new incident. I worry that these stories happen so often that we've become somewhat immune and perhaps a bit detached from the stories and the threats and the potential impacts. So during our time together, we'd really like to open a conversation around the current landscape of cybersecurity, and we'd like to take away some of the mystique of the dark web and maybe walk through some screenshots that show just how cyber criminals are buying and selling stolen data on the dark web, as well as some of the methods that they're using to steal our data. But to start out, we wanted to talk a bit about how breaches occur. As we look at this breakdown of how breaches happen, maybe no surprise that the top offender up here is phishing scams, which have come a really long way in sophistication. Next, we see compromised or stolen credentials, but we're not exactly sure how they were obtained. Just want to pause for a second and point out that these top two types, phishing and compromised credentials, account for just shy of 3/4 of all breaches. I think that's worth noting and definitely pretty staggering. But we see some other methods listed here that we need to touch on. Ransomware attacks use malicious software or malware, which is also listed here. Ransomware is designed, of course, to prevent access until the ransom is paid. We've seen a really dramatic increase in ransomware attacks, which are typically spread through phishing emails or by visiting an infected website. Other breaches are the result of hacking or through brute force, which is a trial and error method where an attacker systematically tests possible passwords until they get a hit. These attacks can take seconds or years, depending on the complexity of the password, with hackers targeting the same systems every day or for months, sometimes in years, all with the hopes of getting in. So although we see several different ways that breaches happen, what we'd really like to emphasize here is that the majority involve credentials being stolen, right? I think we need to acknowledge that just a single compromised credential, that is a stolen employee email address and password, they can result in a massive breach, stolen data, a ransomware attack, whether through a phishing attack or a brute force attack or employees, clicking on an email that they shouldn't or downloading an attachment that has malware. It all starts at that human level, and all of it can have some really major implications. So as we look at this breakdown of how breaches happen, I think we need to acknowledge that it is skewed toward human error, and we have to empower our employees to become more aware and more vigilant. And we have to help train them to play that vital role in the company's overall security. So to dig into this just a bit, I'd like to talk about how employee credentials can lead to a breach. What we're looking at here is, I think, a really great visual that helps us understand just how real and broad the risk can be. We're looking at 9 key functional areas of a business, from HR and payroll to email, all the way through to collaborative tools and social media platforms. As you look through here, we'd really like you to think about all of those places where your employees are going to perform their day-to-day job functions, right? All of those places where they're creating accounts and they're using their work email addresses and they're creating a password. I think we can be really great at addressing threats on the network, but we can't ignore all of these third-party sites where employees are creating logins. Chris, I'm hoping you can jump in and talk just a bit about why we have to think about these third-party sites.
Yeah, thanks. So it's really interesting. So I review breach reports with clients all the time, and I hear over and over, like, why do I care that, somebody hacked my Twitter account, or that LinkedIn was hacked, or, they don't have any of my credit card info, they can't spend any money. But statistics show that 65% of people reuse passwords multiple times across multiple sites. So, hackers will get username and password combinations from low security sites like socials and LinkedIn and stuff, where people feel safe. But then, then they use those usernames and passwords on, your corporate network, on every bank account website that they can find, every, e-commerce site they find, and it's amazing to see how many users are using the same password on both their individual accounts as well as corporate accounts. So, maybe they just hacked LinkedIn, but then they try those passwords on your 365 account, and then, start using your platform then, to communicate with your customers or stuff. So, duplicate and compromised passwords are a major risk.
Absolutely. And I think it shows how just a single exposed email and password can really have that domino effect, right? That leads to things like, lost revenue, downtime, damaged reputation. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of potential for disaster when those bad guys get their hands on employee data. So, with the prevalence of data breaches and stolen employee data, I think it's helpful to touch on and think about security through the lens of what's referred to as the zero trust framework. This concept of zero trust is the acknowledgement and belief that everybody has been compromised. Because once we just accept that everybody has been compromised, that everyone has stolen data on the dark web, we can then shift our focus to access management. That is making sure that the right people have the right secure access to the right machines with the right privileges. And at the same time, we're monitoring for those compromised credentials and external threats. This framework really lets us manage that individual access to make sure that we don't have team members accessing the network when and where they shouldn't, or logging into machines that they shouldn't have access to, or maybe having privileges to sensitive data and applications that are well beyond what's needed for their particular job function. Establishing this cybersecurity framework allows us to really identify and address any gaps, but I think beyond that, zero trust also allows us to work towards alignment with compliance laws, which dictate how we approach security and access management. Because here's the thing, compliance and privacy are no longer optional, right? We could probably have a whole other webinar just on compliance, but I think we need to mention it here just to emphasize that compliance is here and it's not going anywhere. It started with the GDPR in Europe, which was that first entry into making compliance mandatory. Here in the States, California and New York have certainly set the bar high by requiring even small businesses to have insights into what their employees are doing and how and when they're reporting breaches, for instance. we expect compliance regulations only to strengthen and expand from where they are today. So, cybersecurity is no longer a nice to have. It's mandatory, and something that businesses are required to do. We saw in that down early on of breaches that phishing attacks are the most prevalent way that breaches occur, and that hasn't slowed down at all, has it, Chris?
No, we've seen, phishing attacks become way more sophisticated. Hackers are now tailoring phishing specifically to job and role of the users. As there's a ton of information out on the web about everybody in your company. So, we're seeing targeted emails to HR managers embedded, with embedded resumes that contain viruses, or controllers or CFOs getting emails to update bank information for a vendor or a customer to make payments, convincing them to send them money. It's no longer a mass shotgun approach. So it used to be a lot easier because everybody'd get the same message to know it was fake. And then, to complicate things with COVID, because people are working more remotely, it's much more difficult for users to communicate and verify whether or not that email was real. So, you see something, like a CFO get sending out emails from a hacker to employees to go out and buy thousands of dollars of Amazon gift cards, or update bank account for a vendor and send them $100,000. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that in the last 2 years.
Absolutely. And I think probably not surprisingly, the attacks are getting more targeted, they're more sophisticated, and we've, of course, seen a surge in COVID-related phishing scams, right? And lots of them. Here's a real example that we've pulled that's tailored to a specific company, in this case, Miller Supply. I think this really is a great example of what Chris was talking about. Since it appears to be sent from an internal team member, it could definitely be really compelling. But notice, if we look really closely at the sender email, that domain is off by just one letter. It uses that double N instead of an M. Super subtle, but if we're looking closely, that's all we need to tip off that it's a scam. I also want to mention, why limit phishing scams to just email, right? Unfortunately, cyber criminals have realized that they can also carry out these attacks through text messages too. We've always got our phones with us. We're constantly looking at incoming messages. How easy is it to be caught off guard, see that new text message that we click on without really stopping to even think about it? I was speaking with someone just a few weeks ago who was working with a client whose employee had clicked a link in a phishing text message, and now there are issues not just with her phone, but with the application she uses on that phone to access company data. So unfortunately, we've got to be on our toes with our incoming emails as well as our text messages. I think the bottom line is that phishing scams are getting increasingly sophisticated and targeted and tough to detect, but there are some steps that we can take to identify the scams. We've all been pretty focused on good hygiene and washing our hands to decrease our risk to COVID. What if we applied that same hygiene to our email? What if we trained our employees to take just 20 seconds to examine an email and look for those telltale signs? Here's a list of some of those key things to look for. See if that message includes super generic content or maybe a broad impersonal greeting. Second, always look closely at the email address, particularly that domain. As we saw in that example, sometimes it's off by just a single letter or number. That's all it takes to tip off that it's a scam. Third, consider if the message is trying to create that false sense of urgency, or maybe it's just got some really strong demands for actions. Fourth, look very closely at any link before clicking. Just that simple mouse over can tell us if the destination looks legit or if it might be steering us into a trap. Fifth, look for those misspelled words, the incorrect grammar, or weird messaging, and always make sure that that site is secure before entering any sensitive data. And then finally, and I would say one of the most important aspects here, think twice before clicking on any attachments. Most computer viruses are spread through email attachments. So that attachment may look important, may look super time sensitive, but it could have some malware that can cause a lot of damage. I think so often we can be in a rush and distracted when checking email, but if we take just that 20 seconds to stop and look for these key things, it can save a whole lot of trouble and potential disaster down the road. I know we've got lots of support and resources that can really help educate employees on what to look for. Isn't that right, Chris?
Yeah, so over the last year, we've started fake fish testing our clients with their permission, and the statistics have been staggering. So overall, we're seeing that 20 to 30% of the users that we sent these emails to opened and clicked links in the phishing. So, and then the scary part is over 10% of the users on average enter data. So that means they were asked to log into a website, often to a website that they probably wouldn't have access to, right? So an average employee, getting an email from the Better Business Bureau, or, log into your business Amazon account. And if they don't have access to those things, so the phishing attacks have become so sophisticated and so realistic. It used to be really easy to find those misspelled words or the wrong logo, or stuff like that, the white boxes around pictures and stuff. But now with technology today, they can literally with clicks grab the entire homepage of a bank website and make it look legit. And I'd say it's very surprising to look at who is clicking and entering data. A lot of people sit there and think, oh, it's the the entry level employee, right? But I'm seeing CFOs, owners of businesses, operations managers, data entry people for on the accounting staff, and some of those people have access to very important bank accounts and logins and stuff. So you really have to be careful these days.
Absolutely. I think that effective ongoing, security awareness program really can help, reduce those vulnerabilities and build that human firewall and turn all employees, right, top to bottom, into that integral part of cyber defenses. And just to underscore the point, and underscore the need for that ongoing security awareness program, I think, like Chris mentioned, we just wanted to show how easy it can be to launch these successful phishing scams, since they are, one of the easiest yet most effective ways that employee data is stolen. Phishing kits like what's on screen here are available for purchase on the dark web, and cyber criminals, even those with minimal technical skills, can pretty easily launch phishing campaigns using these pre-made phishing templates and the step-by-step instructions that are included. And as Chris mentioned, as part of those phishing kits, legitimate websites are cloned, and those emails, of course, point to a credential stealing login page. Here's a side-by-side example of the actual Facebook landing page and the landing page included in one of these phishing kits. I don't know about you, but it's nearly impossible to tell the difference, and I think you can see just how effective this would be. Most users, myself included, would be hard-pressed to tell the difference, and I think it shows exactly why these kits can be so effective. And again, because they make it so simple and effortless to launch, it's a pretty compelling business proposition for those bad actors who are looking to profit off of our data. So we know that there's a thriving marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen credentials on the dark web, but we may not have a clear picture of what exactly the dark web looks like, how it operates, and how cyber criminals are able to conduct their business. So we thought it'd be helpful to share some actual snapshots that our analysts grabbed from the dark web, so we can really get a good look. So this first one, this is a shot that showed a criminal organization offering up credit cards to buyers. Probably a little bit tough to read, but it's an advertisement for the full package. Actual physical credit cards, complete with pins and spending limits, pretty much everything that they need, and they're kind enough to ship to buyers discreetly via FedEx. Unfortunately, it's become pretty common and increasingly easy to buy stolen credit cards on the dark web. Not sure if you guys may have heard, but we just had a pretty big election, and not surprisingly, not even our voter registration information is safe. Check out this product offering that includes the personal data for 1.8 million Kansas voters, and it includes their names, addresses, dates of birth, and more. But it's not just limited to Kansas. There's the same offer for lots of other states. And notice these prices, again, might be a little bit hard to read, but $10,000 plus for these stolen credentials and stolen data. And these are just the ones we were able to fit on the slide. And check out this listing for the largest known data dump, all for $10, and how these criminal operations are run similar to legitimate businesses, complete with ratings about responsiveness and product quality. If you are a 5-star hacker, you definitely have credibility in the space and can build a base of loyal recurring customers. And then here's a dark web listing offering up data on California business owners. Notice the reference to Fulls, F-U-L-L-D, in the listing title. That's not a spelling error. That's actually a term used by fraudsters that indicates it's got enough personal information to commit identity fraud, usually name, social security number, date of birth, account numbers, and more. Notice they're calling out that they've got high credit scores. If you're a bad actor looking to capitalize off of this information, you want to make sure you're going after those that have the really good credit scores. So as you can see, this one was so popular that it sold out. Another example, lots of us are using Zoom to meet and collaborate while working from home. We're even using it for this webinar now. As a result of the pandemic, lots of us turned to Zoom to connect. In fact, Zoom went from 10 million daily meeting participants in December to 300 million daily meeting participants in April of 2020. With that crazy increase in usage also came concerns around Zoom security practices. You probably heard one particular area of concern was the new Zoom bombing phenomenon, where those uninvited attendees troll Zoom meetings with the sole intent of disrupting, often doing some pretty disturbing and troubling things. Well, hackers got a hold of a bunch of compromised Zoom accounts and posted them on the dark web so that bad actors can get everything they need to bomb these meetings. In fact, last April, a cybersecurity intelligence firm found more than 500,000 Zoom accounts for sale on the dark web, with accounts being sold for less than a penny each. So quite a bargain, I suppose. And then finally, if anyone's looking for a career change or a new job, the Dark Overlord is hiring, and he pays quite well. This is an actual job posting from the dark web, and you'll notice for 10 years of experience and some innovative thinking, a cyber criminal can make a whopping $762,000 to start, increasing over $1 million in just 2 years. That's some pretty good money, and underscores, I think, just how lucrative a career in cybercrime can be. What I also find so interesting is that there's a probationary period, performance reviews, just like those legitimate companies might put in place. So turning now from the snapshots of the dark web, we wanted to touch on a couple of emerging methods that we're seeing cyber criminals use to execute attacks. One is this trend where a ransomware attack escalates to extortion, essentially. Generally speaking, the guidance has been that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, you don't pay the ransom because there's no guarantee that paying off the cyber criminals will get that data back. But now cyber criminals aren't just encrypting data, they're also stealing it. And they're telling victims that if they don't pay the ransom, they'll release that stolen data on the dark web. So that even if an organization can afford to rebuild and restore the data on its own, they now have the added pressure of paying just to keep their files off of the dark web. This tactic first emerged in late 2019 when Maze launched a ransomware attack against Allied Universal, which is a large security staffing company. Allied Universal refused to pay the ransom, so as soon as that ransom deadline passed, the attackers leaked about 10% of what they'd stolen and then threatened to release the rest if the company didn't meet their demands. Since then, Maze ransomware attacks have infiltrated companies and organizations just around the world and demanded payment in exchange for the safe and private recovery of that stolen data. I think this extortion tactic is yet another example of how cyber criminals are getting smarter and more sophisticated in the way they're executing these attacks. And as companies embrace backup solutions that would be able to restore their systems and data without having to negotiate with the attackers, cyber criminals evolve and they stay one step ahead by stealing that sensitive company data and then threatening to leak it if the ransom isn't paid. I think it's important and maybe a good reminder to think about what would happen if your business suffered an attack like this, and whether you've got that business continuity plan in place to make sure that should disaster strike, you're able to minimize the downtime and overall effects to your organization. Speaking of ransomware, we've also seen the emergence of ransomware as a service. For a subscription costing just a few $100 a month, cyber criminals can get a really nice branded platform to log into, like we see here. They can add in all of the contacts or companies that they want to launch an attack against, all of those people that they'll send the ransomware to, and there are even pre-made templates ready to go. They essentially just sit back and monitor the attack through their dashboard. They can see who's opened, who's clicked the link, who's paid the ransom. It's really, this ransomware as a service is a really easy way to operationalize, right, ransomware attacks for deployment on a really large scale, and it allows even the novice cyber criminal to launch attacks without too much difficulty. So we've talked a lot about the ways that cyber criminals can steal data, how that data is bought and sold on the dark web, and how easy and sophisticated those methodologies can be. But we don't want this to be all bad and devastating. Yes, there are some serious threats out there that can cause some serious damage to your business, but if we're aware of those threats and if we take steps to increase security, we can minimize the risks and help protect your business and your employees. We've got some tips here to start moving in that direction. We've spent some time on the first few here, checking the links before clicking and looking closely at any suspicious or unexpected attachments. But let's circle back on compliance just a moment. As we said, compliance is no longer optional. It's not going anywhere, and businesses are required to take steps to protect data and privacy. Automation can help manage all of the compliance regulations and documentation. We talked quite a bit about the ramifications of exposed passwords. So it's incredibly important to help employees protect those passwords, both on the network and off, perhaps through a password manager. You can add an extra layer of security through two-factor authentication or 2FA or even MFA. Part of that zero trust framework that we talked about is ensuring that the right users have access, and 2FA can help with that. There are some great solutions that can provide a balance between convenience and security. Keep an eye on the bad guys here. Monitor the dark web. We talked quite a bit about how exposed credentials can lead to catastrophe. Ongoing credential monitoring can provide those critical early alerts that can help prevent a potential costly and widespread data breach down the road. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, bring in that team that you trust to help put together the security strategies that will work best for your company. Really lean on them to provide the guidance and advice that will help you stay on top of that changing threat landscape. You're busy, you're working hard to build your business, so we encourage you to protect that business by certainly understanding the risks that we've talked about today and accepting that there are measures that you can take to minimize vulnerabilities, and then bring in that team that you trust and that can help guide you through the current threat landscape. I know FutureLink is certainly here to be a resource and can help you figure out where you are today with security and help put in place a plan to get you where you need to be. And I think, Chris, you've got a good first step to get headed in that right direction.
Yes, definitely. So, everybody on this call today, obviously has some concern over what's already out there, or, how to get started. So for everyone that attended today, we're going to offer a free dark web report and consultation. So we can actually, search the dark web for compromised credentials that are actively being bought and sold on the web. So with that, with the email after that, we'll have the link of the presentation. There'll be a link in there that you could schedule that call review those results. We think it's really important to go over them with people individually for a couple reasons. You know, we don't want to accidentally send compromised passwords to somebody that legitimately shouldn't be seeing them. And then, you know, also, you know, sometimes, you know, some of the information can be easily dismissed that might be really important. So with that, you know, we're 15 to 30-minute call to just go over the results, what's out there, and where to go next. And also, so one person that's on the webinar today is gonna get an offer for a free network security assessment. So this is an in-depth network review of your network. You know, starts off with some, you know, basic questions, identifying your, you know, your primary applications, you know, departments, who should have access to what, and then running a whole bunch of network security audits on your network. So typically this assessment, we usually charge over $1,600 for, depending on the size of the network. But somebody here today is going to get that for free. So keep an eye out on the email after this webinar to schedule your review.
Fantastic. So if you have any questions for Chris or I on anything we've talked about, please feel free to drop that in the Q&A. Chris, I'm just checking to see if anything has come through yet.
So Kim, here's one. So somebody posted, how do I get my credentials off the dark web once they've been exposed?
How indeed. I don't know if this person's going to like my answer here, because unfortunately, you know, once your credentials are on the dark web, there is no way to remove them, which is, I think, one of the reasons why exposures are so troublesome. Once it's out there, you just can't get it back. But I think this is why it's certainly important to team up with that knowledgeable team. They can provide the guidance to mitigate, you know, any risks posed by those exposed credentials. And I also think it's why ongoing dark web monitoring is so important. Unfortunately, we often see that scammers will almost piggyback on exposures with additional and even more targeted scams that can lead to even more problems. So that ongoing credential monitoring can provide that critical early alert when additional exposures hit the dark web, so that, again, you can take that swift action.
All right, so you kind of touched on this one, Kim, but how often to check for stolen emails and passwords on the dark web?
Yeah, I think so. What we're offering is a scan of the dark web, and I think that's really important and a good, helpful starting point. And that is essentially going out and pulling in a report of anything that is already on the dark web, so that we can provide the guidance and next steps to, you know, mitigate any potential risks by what's already out there. That's super helpful, super important, but ongoing credential monitoring is what's really helpful and important, and that's that 24/7, 365 monitoring of the dark web. It's ongoing, so that as soon as any email address with your company's email domain is found, it's immediately reported so that you can be notified and take the necessary precautions to you know, prevent that potential data breach. So it's really that external monitoring that provides some peace of mind and ensures that we're going to detect and mitigate cyber threats posed by those stolen employee email addresses and passwords.
All right, so that leads into there's another question here that works out perfect. If you find out that employees have stolen info on the dark web, what do you do next? It's
yeah.
Layered, complicated question.
Yeah, it's so I mean, you know, first and foremost, I hate to sound like a broken record, but you really do want to work with your security provider. You know, they're going to be able to provide that advice and guidance to minimize any potential vulnerabilities. Depending on the data that was collected, you know, for example, there might be there may need to be a scan on the computer or the network, and maybe some security checks that need to be completed. But aside from that, and generally speaking, for the employee who has that exposed email address and password, we certainly want to suggest that they immediately change the compromised password on every account where it's been used, and that includes any variation, right? I don't know if you guys are like me, but initially I would, I had my main password, and then I was so clever and added a 1 and then an exclamation point, and we know that once a password is exposed, that password and any variation of it needs to change. It can no longer be used. There are some pretty sophisticated automated things that hackers can do to test all kinds of variations of a password. So we really do encourage the user to make that list of all the websites where that password or any variation of it were used. And that's both those that are not work-related, so both personal and work-related email accounts. And then they need to log into each one of those accounts and change the password. Make sure while they're there, review those account settings and just ensure that no information has been changed. They can no longer use that password. It's always a good idea to contact the organization associated with the account if there's been any unusual activity. And then, make sure they're keeping an eye on bank accounts, financial accounts, checking bank statements, looking for that suspicious activity, and anything strange needs to be reported immediately.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. So I when I talk to clients and that, let's say the LinkedIn hack, right? They go and they update it on LinkedIn, but to think about where else could you have used that password or a similar password, I don't think a lot of people go that far, which is really, really important. Here's another one. So how do we know if our employees are using good password practices? So I'll grab this one. So we work with employers all the time. We put in these, password policies and, maybe some HR policies around the IT space, what they can do with, but then how do you know if your employees are following the rules, right? That, we can enforce it on the corporate network, for computer login and even 365, but, it's really difficult to, from the IT standpoint, to force somebody to use a strong password and a unique password on Facebook and the bank account, right? There's nothing that is looking across platforms. But one thing we found, if you use a good corporate business class password wallet, which we have a couple solutions for, that we can report on employees' passwords, not necessarily see them and share them, but it will show us what employees have breached passwords, right? And that we can report on. We can find that information. We can get those users to change that information. But we can also see employees that are using duplicate or weak passwords. So we might find a few users on the network that 87% of their passwords are similar. So then we can teach and train that employee how to use better password practices. Old passwords. So we can also report on passwords that haven't changed in over 90 days. Talked about the timeliness of monitoring those passwords, but one easy thing to do is if you could just limit your risk. If a password's changed every 90 days, you're shrinking the window of that exposure. So being able to report on how employees are using passwords and if they're following the rules is really a critical step of making sure that your employees are protecting your company's assets. So is there any other questions? That's everything that's in the queue. So if there's nothing else, I really like to thank everyone for attending our presentation, Protecting Your Company's Most Valuable Asset. As we mentioned, the webinar is being recorded, so you'll get an email shortly with the follow-up and the recording as soon as it comes available. Again, thank you for all of our attendees and Kim for helping us out today. Have a great afternoon.